Clayton, what's up with Exodus 4, verses 24 and 26? God has just sent Moses to Egypt to rescue the people, and then out of nowhere, it says that God wants to kill Moses. But then Moses' wife circumcises their son, and so God leaves Moses alone? What the heck is going on? I got this question from a bunch of people, and I know exactly why. Let me read you the passage they're talking about. This is just after God has called Moses at the burning bush and said, "Go to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let my people go." And while he's on the way, going from Mount Sinai to Egypt to do the thing God told him to do, it says this: "At a lodging place along the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. 'Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me,' she said, and so the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said, 'bridegroom of blood,' referring to circumcision." Okay, there's a lot in there that is very confusing. And let me just be honest. I don't know all of what's going on here. There are a lot of things about this passage that are very complex, even for scholars. And so we're not going to be able to figure out all the details. But I will say this before we get into what I think this means. When you come across a story that surprises you or shocks you or makes you say, "Whoa, what's going on here?" that may be deliberate, like on the part of the author. Like God and the human author may actually be writing this in a way that makes you say, "Stop. Slow down. Maybe you're getting in the groove of the story, and I need to surprise you to make you think." Sometimes when you come across those, "What is going on here?" our instinct is to just keep moving and skip it, and sometimes that's okay if it keeps you reading. But it's also good sometimes to say, what actually is going on here? Let me see if I can dig in and figure it out. And maybe you can't figure it out on your own. Maybe the notes in a study Bible will help. But occasionally you'll say, if I slow down, maybe I'll see something here. Okay. But in this case, this is a pretty tricky one. I actually watched a 30-minute interview with Dr. Carmen Imes explaining this, and I still don't get a whole lot of what's going on. Okay. Dr. Imes was on the show before to talk about the book of Exodus when we started reading the book of Exodus. And so she's an expert in this and has done a lot of study, and there's just a lot to it. Let me give you kind of the three big questions that need to be answered to try to figure this out, okay? The first is this: why does God want to kill Moses? The second is, what's the deal with circumcision? Like, why does that matter here? And then the third is, why does Zipporah take her son's foreskin and touch it to Moses' feet? Like, that's a very weird gesture. So those are the three questions. And the first one, why does God want to kill Moses? I'm going to actually have to wait to the end to explain that, because answering the other two questions helps explain that one, okay? So let's start with this. Why circumcision? What's the deal about that in this story, okay? Circumcision is uncomfortable for us because of for obvious reasons, but it is really important in the Bible. It is actually the one single command that God gives Abraham's family in the book of Genesis, and he gives it to them as a sign of the covenant. He says, "I'm making a promise to you. You are going to be my people. I'm going to make something of you, and here's what I want to ask you to do to mark yourself as belonging to me. I want you to circumcise all of your sons." Okay, every male is going to be circumcised. When a new baby is born on the 8th day, circumcise him. So this is kind of the mark of saying this person is in the covenant, a part of the covenant people, is circumcision. And we think this is a strange sign, but it's the best way to think of it is it's sort of like a symbolic castration. Okay, I'm not going to unpack all of this. I've answered that in past Hey Clayton episodes, but it's the idea that the person is saying, without God, I am impotent. I cannot make a future for myself. I cannot produce life for myself. There is no people of God without you. On our own, we cannot make a future or give life to ourselves. And so it's a way of showing total dependence on God and saying, I am yours. I belong to you. Now, this is the interesting thing about Moses. Moses, if you've been reading along, you know, although he was born to a Hebrew family, he was raised in the court of Pharaoh. He was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, and would have been raised in an Egyptian context, okay? Also, Moses marries a Midianite woman, which means although his heritage is Hebrew, his upbringing is Egyptian, and his family by marriage is Midianite. So there is a big question hanging over Moses' head. This is the guy who's going to go rescue God's people, and he isn't even clearly delineated as part of God's people, right? it was likely that Moses was not circumcised as a baby. If you're trying to hide your kid from getting killed and not call them out as a Hebrew, you probably wouldn't circumcise them as a baby. But Egyptians did circumcise their sons at puberty for other reasons. So Moses probably was circumcised, but not as part of the kind of covenant signs that were going on. Okay, so when Zipporah, his wife, goes and circumcises their son, what's going on here is it's almost a way of saying, you know what? The one command I gave you, it was to circumcise your son, but you haven't done that. And so God is saying, all right, you need to do that. You need to actually fulfill the one thing that marks you and your family as part of the covenant people. And so Zipporah, for some reason, seems to know this is why God is threatening him. And so she goes and fulfills that command and says, I'm going to go circumcise my son, and we're going to fulfill this command. And so in some ways, when she says, you are a bridegroom of blood to me, it's almost a phrase that means, okay, we're family by blood now. Okay, this is for real. We're all in. We're part of the covenant family here. And this is important because Moses is going to give the command later that nobody who is uncircumcised is allowed to eat the Passover meal. Okay, this is later in the story. But in a way, it's a way of saying only if you're only if you're part of the people can you share in this meal that's going to liberate people. And if Moses and his family haven't even done this, they've got to get that squared away. Okay, but why the detail about Moses' wife taking the foreskin and touching Moses' feet with it? Okay. This is strange. There is some ambiguity here because the question of whose feet are they touching? In the Hebrew, it just says his feet. So maybe it's her son's feet or Moses' feet or the Lord's feet. It's hard to know, kind of what it's referring to. It's probably Moses' feet, okay? But this is what she's doing. She's taking this and saying, you are a bridegroom of blood. You're a blood relative to me. We are now kin together. And here's an even more uncomfortable part about this. The word feet in Hebrew is across the Old Testament sometimes used as a euphemism for the male sexual anatomy, okay? And so what she did may not have been touching his literal feet. It may have been taking this foreskin and touching his male organ. And in a way saying, okay, here's the deal. Moses, you got circumcised as a teenager as part of the Egyptian cultural heritage, but we're circumcising our son as in the Hebrew heritage, as saying we're part of the covenant, and we're also marking you, even though you're already circumcised for another reason, as this circumcision is part of that. You are in this, okay? I know this is super strange. I don't get to show you all of the reasons why this is the case, but I think that's probably what's going on. And so here's what's going on. Moses needs to be marked as one of God's people. And this is the reason why I think God was threatening to kill him in the beginning. Okay? I don't think this was God attempting to kill him, like, I put you in a situation and you dodged it, okay? This is almost like a threat saying, okay, if you're going to do this, this is a life or death matter, okay? This ceremony of circumcision is essentially the dividing line from being part of the Egyptian culture and being a part of God's people, Israel. And so, Moses, which side of the line are you going to be on, right? Remember that Moses, as an adopted son of Pharaoh's court, is kind of in trouble because God has just said in the verse right before this, go to Pharaoh and say, let my son go that he may worship me. Meaning God's saying, let my son, the nation of Israel, go so that Israel, my son, may worship me. But Pharaoh refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn. This is what God's saying. Pharaoh, you're going to refuse to let my son go, Israel go, so I'm going to kill your son. So think about this. Moses is kind of a son of Egypt. He's kind of a son in Pharaoh's court. And so to say, all right, which side of this are you going to be on? Are you going to be with the Egyptians and side with your kind of upbringing in Pharaoh's court? Or are you going to be with your people? Are you going to be part of God's people? Are you a son of Pharaoh or a son of God? Which line are you going to be on? Which line do you think is going to keep you safe from God? So Moses needs to identify with God's people and not the Egyptians. And until he does, he's under the threat that God is leveling against the Egyptians because they've mistreated his people. So this is, again, a very complicated thing. There are details that probably still don't make a ton of sense. But what's really going on is this. Pick a side, Moses. Pick a side. And I kind of have three kind of reflections on this. The first is this. You cannot be half in and half out with the world. You need to be marked as God's people, okay? You need to be fully in. Sometimes people will say, I'm going to dabble a little bit. I'm going to live like all the people around me. I'm going to hold all the values in a lifestyle that's like everybody around me. And I'm going to kind of dabble with the Jesus stuff. I'm going to dabble with the God stuff. Go to church when it's helpful for me. But God says, no, you got to be all in. Are you in or you're out? Are you part of God's people or not? And in fact, even though circumcision is not the way people are marked as his people anymore, there is a sign that is supposed to publicly mark God's people, and it's baptism. And in a lot of ways, this is like God going to Moses and saying, are you really in with me? Go ahead and get baptized, right? That's the way it would be for us, saying, are you all in? Saying, I'm really identifying with God's people. Get baptized. Second reflection is this. There should be no hypocrisy among the leaders of God's people. This is Moses who's saying, I'm going to go and be the person to rescue God's people from Egypt, but I'm not even willing to fully identify with God's people. I'm kind of on both sides of the fence here. And so this is not okay. Leaders have got to be all in, whatever it takes, obeying God all the way, doing what he says. We don't want hypocrisy among our leaders. Third reflection is this. I think it's really interesting that the rescuer that God sends for his people in Exodus, Moses, has to be fully identified with God's people in order to rescue them. This is also true about the ultimate rescuer that God sent. Jesus showed up, and the first thing that happened in Jesus' ministry is he said, I'm going to be fully identified with the people I'm coming to rescue. And so what did he do? He got baptized. Sometimes people say, why did Jesus have to get baptized? He had no sin, right? Like, what's there to repent of? And what does he need cleansing from? Well, what he was doing was saying, I'm with you. I'm going to be marked just like you. I'm going to be one of you so that I can rescue you. I'm fully on your side. And so just like Moses identifying with God's people, Jesus comes and says, I'm going to identify with you and I'm going to save you. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.